We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Thursday, July 2nd here in Seoul. I'm Lee Soo-jin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Chiyun. Good to have you, and also Keys with us. Good morning. And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So we're now heading towards the end of the work week, and before we switch into weekend mode, let's take a look at a story that's been dominating conversations online here in Korea. And one issue in particular has really captured the attention of younger Koreans. So why is a certain high-profile divorce case in Korea drawing so much attention these days, Gina?
Yes. A landmark divorce case in South Korea involving one of South Korea's leading business families has once again returned to the spotlight. I'm sure this has become one of South Korea's most closely watched stories in recent months. Talk of the town. Well, the legal dispute has continued for nearly 9 years, and with the amount at stake exceeding 1.3 trillion won, that is around $1 billion, it has become one of the largest divorce settlements ever since in this country. So it's truly on a historic scale right now. The case that is, has sparked widespread public interest and renewed debate over company ownership and control, inherited wealth, and the division of marital assets. Well, the legal experts also say the decision could become an important reference point for future family law disputes. So marital assets concerns a lot at this time. So at this point, it's not just a divorce case, it's becoming a national talking point in Korea.
And the figure you mentioned is obviously an eye-catching number, but it seems like the public interest goes beyond just the money itself and just money involved. And many say the case also reflects how Korean society's attitudes toward marriage and divorce have changed over the years. So then what does this case tell us about the changing views on divorce here in Korea?
Sure. So the issue about divorce also reflects the changing attitudes in South Korea towards divorce and the division of marital assets. In the past, divorce was considered to be a personal failure or a stain on one's reputation, leading some celebrities to maintain what they call show window couple, meaning remaining together only for appearances despite having been effectively separated already. Today, however, divorce carries far less social stigma. Public opinion has become more accepting of the people who choose to end an unhappy marriage, and when one spouse clearly violates the rule, the other spouse often receives strong public sympathy and support.
So it really shows how much public attitudes have shifted from judging divorce itself to focusing on the circumstances behind it. So we're going to talk more about this, but first, let's take a look at the screen. For decades, divorce was considered taboo in Korea, and many couples stayed together despite being in unhappy marriages. But as attitudes toward divorce continue to evolve, conversations are shifting beyond just the separation itself to what comes after, including how assets should be divided. Today on News Generation, we take a closer look at how younger Koreans view dividing assets after divorce, the pros and cons of society's changing attitudes toward divorce, and share our own thoughts on whether these changes are ultimately for the better. Just as you saw in a video, divorce is no longer viewed the way it once was, and those changing attitudes are especially noticeable among younger generations. So how have younger Koreans' view on divorce changed over the years, Chiyun?
Yes, as you mentioned in the VCR, yes, divorce was once considered a social taboo in South Korea. We didn't talk that much. However, attitudes have changed significantly over the years. If we look at the numbers here, there were only about 12,000 divorces back in 1970, and that figure climbed steadily, reaching a peak of around 91,000 in 1997. And last year, this number stood at about 88,000. 100,000. Well, although the divorce rate has edged down in recent years, many experts say that's largely because fewer people are tying the knot. They're getting married in the first place. So among millennials and Gen Z, staying in an unhappy marriage, the relationship is no longer seen as something they simply have to endure. Acceptance is no longer the only option for them. Instead, many believe it's better to move on if the relationship is not working well. So why is it? Many experts say this shift is driven by several factors, including changing social attitudes toward divorce, greater financial independence among women, and also a stronger emphasis on personal happiness and life satisfaction. They value their personal life. So many young Koreans today see marriage as a choice, not a lifelong obligation.
It's quite an interesting stat because I just had an errant thought about how it went up in 1997. I wonder if it has anything to do with the IMF.
I don't, yes.
But it's true, things have changed, and it sounds like the focus has shifted from preserving a marriage at all costs to prioritizing personal happiness and compatibility. And as attitudes toward divorce evolve, so do concerns about what happens afterwards. So why are young people so interested specifically in property division after divorce, Kim?
Well, basically, anyone wants to be fair, right? And many younger Koreans, particularly those towards the Generation Z, they place a strong emphasis on the fairness, and they are highly sensitive to situations where they feel they may be at their disadvantages. This mindset extends to the division of the assets and divorce. In fact, one commonly cited reason for divorce among younger people is that both spouses are determined to not to, quote-unquote, lose out. Modern couples are more likely to share financial responsibilities, child cares, household duties, etc. But achieving a perfectly balanced division in everyday life is very unrealistic and leading to frequent conflicts, who did this, who did that. As this attitude becomes more widespread, some younger people have even become more reluctant to get married, viewing the possibility of having to divide their assets in the event of divorce as a significant financial risk of their own.
I think that's true because I do see a lot more couples around me going 50-50 on everything, even after getting married. So it's interesting that fairness doesn't just shape relationships, it also shapes how people think about ending them. And those concerns appear to be growing as people actually tend to marry later in life these days. But then why does, I guess, marrying later make property division a bigger concern, Gia?
Yes, we do know, we talk about this a lot. Yes, many people marry later in their life. So many have already built up significant assets, property, before getting married. As a result, financial concerns surrounding marriage and divorce have become more common among younger generations. There is a popular saying on the Korean online community. It goes, 5 years is cost effective when it comes to divorce. 10 years is a promise.
Promise? Okay.
Love meets economics, I suppose. So this phrase reflects the common belief that after around 5 years of marriage, marital assets may be divided in roughly a 70-30 split, while marriages lasting more than 10 years are more likely to result in a 50-50 split in the event of a divorce. Of course, this isn't based on the law, it's not legally binding, but the saying has become widely shared online and reflects growing concerns about property division. And some online users also exchange some practical advice to them, such as keeping major assets under separate ownership, because in Korea, when we buy apartments or houses, we've got to put that on a name, certain name, and if it's over separate ownership, it's easy for them to, split. And also signing a pre-nuptial agreement before marriage is kind of a thing. So a legal agreement contract signed before marriage in order to protect their assets, that's kind of important things for them. It obviously shows that many young people today are thinking not only about love, but also about financial planning before marriage. Love may be priceless, but people still do the math now.
I love the last line. I mean, I guess it is because of the economy.
Yes.
Everything comes with a price tag. We have to think about that. So it is fascinating how also online communities have to even develop their own rules of thumb and financial advice around marriage and divorce. And that naturally raises a bigger question about whether these concerns are changing the way people then approach marriage itself. So to get a more in-depth perspective on all of this, we're going to talk to a divorce lawyer. And that conversation will take place right after the break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out channel Arirang News. Click Posts. and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
We're joined now by Yoon Seok-chan, a partner and divorce lawyer at the law firm Lee & Co. So hello, thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. And also, so have divorce cases involving younger couples really become more common? And I guess, what issues are younger couples most often divorcing over?
Yeah, it might come as a surprise to many, but divorces among younger couples are actually on the slight decline. According to the latest data from the Ministry of Data and Statistics, divorces among couples married for 4 years or less have dropped by over 5% year on year. While a decade ago, newlyweds accounted for the largest share of divorces, that position now has been overtaken by twilight divorces, those married for 30 years or more. And I believe some of the reason and part of this shift is demographic, as mentioned earlier, driven by a declining marriage rate over the past decade. It is also economic. In order to combat the low birth rate, the government has rolled out various financial and housing incentive schemes which encourage couples to stay together. That said, when younger couples do choose to divorce, the catalysts have evolved, and the primary drivers are no longer just traditional family conflicts. Rather, we are seeing sharp clashes over personality differences alongside intense financial stress fueled by high inflation and housing costs, which are frequently compounded by divergent views on investments, whether to invest on real estate or stocks and things like that. The younger generation views marriage through the lens of individual happiness. If a partnership compromises their inner identity or financial security, they no longer fear the social stigma that kept past generations from walking away.
I see. The numbers that you mentioned earlier are quite shocking. Then my question will be, what's the biggest misconception, the common misunderstanding about property division?
Yes, the most pervasive myth is that the at-fault spouse forfeits their right to property division. Many people wrongly assume that if a partner caused the breakdown of the marriage through infidelity or otherwise, they lose everything. In reality, however, Korean law treats property division and consolation money, in other words, emotional damages, in Korean 위자료, as two entirely separate legal frameworks. The at-fault spouse is liable for damages, but property division simply liquidates assets jointly accumulated through mutual cooperation during the marriage. Even an unfaithful spouse retains a statutory right to their equitable share, and notably, any agreement to waive this right prior to the actual filing of a divorce is legally invalid. Another massive misconception is that whoever holds the title owns the asset. It does not matter if a home is registered solely under one spouse's name, but of course the scenario will be slightly different if that home was already under one spouse's name before the marriage, but when the home or any other type of asset was acquired during the marriage, then what matters is the contribution, not the legal title name. Furthermore, future or unrealized assets, such as potential pension entitlements, are also subject to division. The court applies an equitable distribution model based on, as I mentioned earlier, on contribution, meaning a dedicated homemaker can routinely secure 40% to 50% of the whole marital property, depending on the length of the union. Finally, remember that division applies to liabilities as well as assets. In worst-case scenarios, if a major investment decision fails, a spouse could potentially be left bearing significant debt without receiving any tangible assets. So you should be very careful before making a great investment decision.
Thank you, Mr. Yoon. Just like you said, there might be some court battles, but then more and more couples are choosing to have a mediation over the court battle. Why do you think the reason behind it? And also, if you were to give a piece of advice to the newly married couple, what would it be?
Yes, couples are opting for mediation because full-scale litigation is quite exhausting, financially, logistically, and emotionally. Standard court proceedings can drag on from 6 months to well over a year and still remain subject to lengthy appeals. Litigation is public, highly adversarial, and leaves deep psychological scars, particularly when children are involved. Mediation, which is a mandatory preliminary step in Korea in any event, allows couples to settle asset division, custody, and child support behind closed doors with a mediator, typically within 4 to 6 months. It is faster, entirely private, and guided by family experts. Furthermore, because mediation concludes with a mutual agreement, compliance tends to be voluntary, sparing couples from secondary legal battles over compulsory civil execution after court decision. It allows both parties to move forward with their dignity intact. As for my advice to couples getting married today, confront the uncomfortable conversations early and upfront. Modern marriages thrive on transparency and mutual understanding. Explicitly discuss your expectations regarding domestic labor, financial contributions, and family planning. Resolving these foundational issues early on ensures that you won't have to pay a heavy emotional or financial interest on them only later down the road.
You know, I've heard that divorce lawyers are the ones that gives the best marriage advice because they've seen how marriages fall apart. So they're the ones people should turn to for advice. And I can see why, because obviously I can see why transparency and also communication would be so important. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing insights with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've heard from a divorce lawyer about how younger couples are approaching divorce, the realities of property division, and why mediation is becoming increasingly common. But beyond the legal side of things, this also raises broader questions about how society views marriage and divorce today. So there are changing attitudes to divorce, but what are the pros and cons of this, Ki?
So obviously there are fewer cases of unhappy couples who want to stay in the unhappy marriage for the sake of the appearances. But it's just simple. They want to be happy, or they want to be happier, right? So the social stigma surrounding divorced families, like we said before, also declined significantly, and they don't look down on you just because you got divorced. What is more, clear financial arrangements between spouses make the division of assets during divorce more straightforward, like our lawyer said before, reducing the likelihood that either party will be treated unfairly or suffer financial disadvantage. But on the other hand, this kind of shift, like changing trends, would eventually make marriage less valuable than before, because all the promises, all the commitments, all the dedication you said you're going to make throughout your married life would now considered to be a bit feel lighter than before.
Right, so it is a double-edged sword. So what are your thoughts on this as someone who has been married for a while?
Yes, I do believe that this trend has both advantages and disadvantages as well. On the downside, first of all, it may make people even more hesitant to get married because they will think about, oh, is it all about money? Some experts believe it could further accelerate South Korea's already low birth rate and growing trend of remaining single. It may also encourage people to view marriage as a financial agreement than an emotional commitment. That kind of mindset could put unnecessary pressure on a relationship. And if children are involved, it's more complicated than ever. Well, they may end up being the ones most affected, even though they don't have any fault. And after all, a successful marriage should be built on trust, not just careful calculations.
Right, so it seems the conversation is ultimately about finding the right balance between protecting individual happiness and preserving the value of long-term commitment. And that brings us to one final question before we wrap up. So how has, I guess, today's discussion changed how you personally view marriage and divorce, June?
Well, divorce is complicated than a wedding ceremony, that's what I thought. Well, today's discussion obviously reminded me how much attitudes toward marriage and divorce have changed over time in a decade. Every generation seems to have a different perspective, different views on this, but whether it's marriage or divorce, neither should be taken lightly. And of course, financial stability is quite important, but you know, marriage is about much more about, it's not much more about money. It's about trust, understanding, and a willingness to grow all together. I'll say it's kind of a long-term project that you have to go. So both are life-challenging decisions and that desire careful thought. So yes, money matters, but the thing is, people matter more.
Right. So Mr. Yoon told us that his advice for couples getting married is to be transparent and be
Yes.
upfront with your
And
expectations.
have those uncomfortable talks.
Uncomfortable talks. What is your advice on how to preserve a marriage?
Preserve a marriage. I think talk, conversation, have a deep conversation, and go on a date once a week.
Oh, that's a very cute idea. So what are your final thoughts on this?
Well, I can clearly tell the perspective on divorce are different right now. It's not that rare to find those who are already divorced right surrounding you. But most important thing is, of course, being happy, right? And then if you can sustain that happiness throughout your married life, then obviously the divorce can be an option. But the thing is, when you're making the decision, you have to really think about it and you have to be really responsible about it. And especially when your child is involved, you have to put yourself in the child's shoes, right? Because whatever you say, whatever you do, every action you do will affect your child. So make sure you have your child well taken care of when you're making those kind of decisions.
Right. So I asked you a similar question too, but what is your advice for people who are going to get married? What are some important questions to ask before getting married, in your opinion?
Well, it's just I agree with Jiyoung completely. You have to talk a lot, and then you have to be upfront. And there was a lot of things that we talk you can't avoid. For example, like financial status, for example, your family status, and everything. You really have to be upfront and transparent. Of course, sometimes it's going to be very uncomfortable.
Right.
But if you can overcome that uncomfortableness, right? That's most important in preserving the married life.
Right, well said. So marriage may still be built on love, but today's discussion shows it's increasingly viewed through a practical lens as well. And as attitudes toward divorce continue to evolve, so too will expectations about fairness, finances, and commitment. And the real challenge will be finding a balance between protecting individual interests and also preserving trust in a relationship. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to
Thank you for
Chuhyun
having me, Sujin.
and also Ki.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for watching. And remember, talking it out with your spouse is usually cheaper than hiring a lawyer. We are News
News Generation.
Generation.